We realized we hadn't been talking enough about passwords and password management. And, this is a really important topic, and it's still Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So this seems like a really relevant topic at the same time, right, Jay?
Yeah, yeah, and I think I'm aware of it, so I think it succeeded, but then
I f-
again, given my job, I already was aware of it, but you should be aware of it too.
yeah, we want to make sure everyone's aware of cybersecurity and make sure you have enough cybersecurity training. The
Yep.
reality is, if you work in tech, and I think most of the people here are in tech or tech adjacent with the home labs. And so I think this is a solid topic, though, to talk about because, man, people are not always good at it. And there's been a lot of debates. And sometimes I still run into people who are long time in the tech field that have strange opinions on this topic. So we're going to clear a few things
Yep.
up. I'll even address a video that Jay doesn't know about this. I don't think there's a video about extracting passwords from a password manager. I will
Hmm,
be bringing it up and addressing it. Yeah, there's some
cool.
interesting new things out there, but we'll still talk about why that matters. But it's still not a reason not to use a password manager. Before we dive into these details for all the password management, let's talk about Linode, sponsor of this show. So Linode's been a sponsor since the beginning and a great place to run all those different things that you don't want to run in your lab. Run it in Linode's lab or put it on one of their public IP addresses. Great way to host the different projects we talk about. We have a sign up and offer code down below so you can get signed up with Linode, and we thank them for being a sponsor of the show.
Yep, we appreciate it.
All right. What was the first on the list? Because we're going to get to a full blown web based password manager, but I think the first one we want to talk about is probably going to be, or do we want to go really basic? Like, don't put them in spreadsheets. Where
Well,
do we want
yeah, I mean, I think that goes without saying, but, I feel like we've all seen these in their memes at this point where, I think that this actually turned out to be a real product. Somebody, somewhere had a photo of a notepad that was specifically made for passwords where you would just write them in. It would have like
Oh,
pre-filled
yeah.
or areas for username, password, and it looked like one of those old Rolodex books or something like that. And at first I thought it was a joke, but then I realized it actually existed. But I don't think any of our listeners will make that mistake. I guess I could probably summarize all of that with don't write them down on a piece of paper or sticky note. Don't put them in clear text anywhere. I think that goes without saying, but just in case there's someone out there, well, now you know not to do that.
Yeah, and this is interesting. There's there's a weird bias on this. It's probably not the best idea to keep them on paper, but to the same extent, they're a little bit less hackable. You have to maintain your physical security. You also are at risk of losing them. But it is,
Right.
that was a common thing probably in, I want to say, mid 2000s or so. I think that was not an uncommon thing for people to start doing it because this is the earlier days of where the general public, not the technical community, but the general public really started hammering out getting on the web. With the birth of social media, I should say, because it's not like the internet wasn't used for online shopping and things like that before. And I bring this up because I was actually watching Better Call Saul, and it was because of the era that part of it was in. It was just kind of funny how they were going into people's houses, and I'm not trying to spoil anything about it, but they were looking for people's passwords, and they would always just grab them off the monitor, like they were just going physically into people's
Right.
houses to grab their passwords so they could get into stuff. So I was like, that's like low tech, clever burglary hacking, but what common of the era from when that show was set. So
And there is one situation in which I feel like writing passwords down on a piece of paper, having it printed out in clear text is a good thing. And that's if you put it in the safe, because that's not a bad idea. Your keys and whatnot, as long as it's in a safe and no one knows a combination but you. It's not like someone's just going to walk in your house and steal a piece of paper if it's in your safe. And I feel like that's very common for those, emergency passwords. If your two-factor stops working, you'll have a number of these passcodes or whatever. But it probably doesn't hurt. And I did this at one time. I don't do this anymore. I actually did print off the passwords and I did put them in a safe with a lock on it. So that could be an emergency situation where hopefully you'll never need to ever use it. But if something happens, and I have seen situations where people forget their password for their password manager, and if it's encrypted well enough, you're sunk. I mean, if encryption is good, you know it's good if you can't access anything if you lose that encryption key, but don't lose that key. Store it somewhere safe.
yeah, and I'll also mention, I have a video on Fido, and I didn't do one yet. Maybe I'm gonna wait till kind of see where it goes. Things like passkeys. Some of the Fido stuff is awesome. Passkeys is awesome. The adoption right now in October of 2022, the recording of this podcast is so low. It's not a solution I can say is like just use this. As much
Right.
as I love it where it works. I just wish it worked in more places. And even some of the places it does work. So one of my aggravations is some of the places don't allow you to have multiple key slots. So I recommend getting 2 FIDO keys unless you're using service that the FIDO spec allows multiple key slots, so you can register more than one key. That way, if you lose a key, you can still have a backup key. But that standard was not adhered to. So um,
Yep.
I have a couple complaints I had with companies like I can only register one key, and they're like, yeah, we don't have a spot for 2 keys because we adopted and added the support, not native. Like, so we never really thought about the multiple key problem. So we're going to kind of keep the topic off of that. I have a video if you type in Fido on my channel. Jay's also got you have a YubiKey video, am I correct?
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah. I have a FIDO key video. I have more than one, including using FIDO with SSH, which also the challenge of using FIDO with SSH is the server has to support it, not just the client. So once again, you'll run into servers that don't support it because they are using older versions of SSH. Or if you have to deal with some Microsoft things, Microsoft chose to omit it from their compilation of SSH. I don't know why. So Fido's
Hmm.
awesome. We've covered these topics, me and Jay have respectively, but for the most part, we're going to focus on password management.
So do we want to start with KeyPass XC
Yeah, I think
possibly?
KeyPass XE is a good one. And for the people in the Homeland world, I don't think it's a bad one.
Right.
People want to know why I'm not using it if I think it's insecure, and it's a scalability problem. I manage a group of people. I manage employees. As you have more and more people, you realize, and someone will say, "But Tom, there's a way you can synchronize the KeyPass X." Yeah, it doesn't scale to having a lot of people. It just
Right.
I've actually played with it. I have some neat integrations that allow and have some collision detection for managing passwords, but it's hard to scale. But from an individual user standpoint, if you were looking for a good, private, secure, popular, has gone. I don't know if it's ever been truly security audited, but it's popular enough in the market that I think a lot of people have poked at it. Um, I think
Yeah.
it's not a bad choice, and you can put a lot of information, not just because it's more than password management. You need a little bit of your notes management, maybe an API
Yep.
storage. So KeyPass actually has some fields where you can store some of that extra data that's equally important to things.
Yeah, I really like KeyPass XC. I actually use it pretty much every day, but it's not my primary password manager though. But it is something that I use. It was my primary for quite a while, and what I would do is sync it with SyncThing, basically. So I didn't have to worry about which computer was I on at the time I saved this password because that's not really something you want to deal with. It's synchronized throughout all of them, and it worked really well that way. But again, I'm one person and I don't have employees, so you're right. There's ways to make it scale, but you have to engineer that part, and I know a lot of us that or a lot of you guys listening are like, "We have to engineer something? What's the harm in that? That actually sounds like a good thing that I have to, a project to work on." And I totally get that. I later switched to Bitwarden, which we'll talk about later, but I still use KeyPass XC for my home lab because switch passwords and logins to devices and things like that. It's a great solution. And I just keep using it for that. So even though I don't use it for my personal passwords, it's really useful for everything, behind my firewall. And I'm not knocking it at all. It could absolutely be someone's primary solution, and it was for me for quite a while. But just like you said, there's you can scale it, but it's just not like built to scale as well by default unless you round the edges yourself.
Yeah, and the responsibility is on you at that point as well to not only remember the master password but also to keep all the backups. This is something
Right.
that it's just you can't have just 2 copies. Even I feel because it's so important and could lock yourself out of things, have a couple extra copies, have an offline copy of it, make sure you um have a good integration in that, so that or
Yeah.
a good process, I should say, integration, good process for making sure you're managing that data, backing up that data, and keeping it properly secured. Because I say this very emphatically because I just had another person reach out for consulting that thought I could just undelete their entire ZFS, and I'm like, No, all those
Mhm.
data sets are probably obliterated. They purged and deleted it and thought they could just undelete because they realized after they didn't want to, and they had all their data and passwords and everything in it. So
But what I've learned in IT is that, not all users are great at the same thing. Obviously everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, but every user is good at destroying data. Like that's the one thing universally that every user is good at, no matter how their experience is with computers. It's just anytime anyone ever asked me to get something back, I think I had like a couple of occasions where it was easy. But going back to KeyPass XC just one last time, I wanted to kind of point the finger at a feature that I like about it. And I'm not going to say that Bitwarden doesn't have this feature because when I say that, I often find out that Bitwarden does have that feature because they have a lot of features and many of which I'm still discovering. But the window matching feature of KeyPass XC is really cool. So, for example, let's say you're not using a browser. Maybe you're just using an actual app that's outside of the browser, dedicated standalone app, and you look at the window title, and you could actually match the window title to a password entry and have it autofill with a keyboard shortcut that app. So it doesn't have to be in your browser. It's able to autofill pretty much everything. So imagine logging into Steam, for example. That's not in your browser. You could do that with KeyPass XC. I don't know if you can still do that in the new version because I haven't tested it. This is quite a while ago. And then the other thing it can do as well is you can enable browser access to be able to autofill passwords in your browser as well. Not everyone knows that KeyPass XC could do those things because at first it kind of looks like just an app to store passwords and nothing else, but it has some extra features there. I just want to make sure that people are aware of. And those are some pretty useful features to be sure. And if you're like a single person managing everything, again, KeyPass XC might actually be your only solution, and that might be fine.
yeah, I wish they would add that feature to Bitwarden, the window focus part. That would be kind of cool because they
Yeah.
do have desktop apps and command line apps you can interact with Bitwarden, but that little window focus feature is really nice.
Maybe somebody should just put a wish list item in their version or bug tracker or whatever. Now that being said, I don't know that they don't have it, but I guess if you said that they don't, then I guess that it probably means that they don't.
I
But I feel
I was
like it.
opening up the app over here so I could see
Mhm.
if that was an option. I was so
Well, I
like,
know
"Where
in
does it have the
KeyPass
ability to do that?"
XD, it was like, if I remember correctly, a regex or a text string that you just put in a field that the window will have in the window board or the window title. And that's how it works there. So if not, I hope they get it because that would be really cool if you could autofill other apps, not just things in your browser. There is a dedicated app as well with we'll get to Bitwarden. I don't want to spoil too much right now.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there's any feature difference between one or the other, but yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Um, let's see. Alright, that's actually, should we probably move right over to Bitwarden? Did you have anything else to say about KeyPass?
I don't. Bitwarden is one of those things that I just love. I was using before KeyPass XC, I was using LastPass. I don't have a whole lot to say about LastPass because it's been a while since I used it. I actually managed an enterprise LastPass account for a company and all the employees, so I feel like I'm very familiar with it. But that was like 2 or 3 years ago. And eventually, I moved from that to KeyPass XC and then from that to Bitwarden because and this is a personal opinion. This is not a technical analysis at all, just Jay's personal opinion. I really don't like the interface in LastPass. I don't really know why. It just kind of I don't know. I just don't feel like it's the best, most streamlined user interface. And then Bitwarden has some issues with its interface as well, but I feel like it's easy to use. It works. It makes sense. And I really like it. I like it a lot. So Bitwarden is something that you can subscribe to. You can have an account on their system. You could even self-host it if you want to, which I believe is what you're doing.
Yep.
I'm not doing that. And you don't have to pay for it to get all the features. I mean, you get
No,
most, but
they do have a few features that are
yeah,
paid in Bitwarden.
yeah,
There are a few things that are an upsell on there.
okay.
So it's not 100%, but a lot of them are more the enterprise features, I should say. So
Yeah, I
they're
guess
like
that's what I meant to say, yeah,
yeah,
because there's gonna be the majority of the features on the free one, but I've been paying for it because I don't mind supporting a project, and I've been paying for it for so long, I don't even know what's paid or what's not when it comes to features because it's been at least several years that I've had my paid account, and, it's really cheap too. I don't remember what it
yeah.
was off the top of my head, but it's actually very inexpensive.
Yeah, the Bitwarden pricing is really good. And I'll mention, so I've seen someone ask this question, and this is where I land on this. People asking about Vault Warden. So because of the way Bitwarden is built, and it is open source, but people have, of course, forked it. And if you can have something that's open source, you're going to be able to go, hey, let's create a version that's, you know, doesn't have these restrictions in there that I have to pay for, and I want to add all these extra functionality. Well, in my understanding is this is one of the things that Vault Warden does. Also, it's written a little bit differently, so it's open source. It's written a little differently. It's not complete. It's based on the same code, but it has some different ways it's integrated.
Hmm.
Which also worries me a little bit about Vault Warden. So when it comes to password security, one of the things Bitwarden has done is really set the bar high. I've used Bitwarden as an example to a lot of other vendors in the enterprise IT and the managed service provider spaces. If you guys want to be transparent about your security, look at the way Bitwarden does it. They don't just go through their regular security audits. They're very transparent in how they publish the findings of their security audits. And I think that's an important thing because, just because we can't see the code doesn't mean anyone's ever looked at the code. That is the myth of open source, that because you
Right.
can see the code, someone has looked at the code. I'm sorry,
Right.
those things are not, those don't those don't always work that way.
Right.
But in the case of Bitwarden, they have paid very good engineering companies, different ones. That way, you're not getting the same opinion from the same people. They've had different engineering, security testing companies really go through their code, find problems, and they've pushed out fixes for them, or find edge cases, really poke away at it. So, because they've spent a lot of time on that, I trust that their code is secure, and they are absolutely forthcoming and dumping every year when they go through their audits of how things are done, making sure they're following secure code practices. The moment someone forks your code and starts doing their own thing, did someone audit the forked code is the question, because it's not like you
Right.
can't fork a project and it's secure at the moment you forked it. It becomes up in the air depending on what changes were made. I've never taken the time, and I don't know who has, to look at Vault Warden and say, hey, did they do things in a really secure manner when they did all of that? Because when you look at the fact that it's like, well, it comes out to be $333 a month. I know you got to pay annually, so multiply that times 12. But either way, when you look at the pricing being so low, my security is worth more than the 36 was that comes out like 36 or 37. Let's just say 40
Something
bucks a
like
year
that. Yeah.
US. $40 US to have a solid back end security. I feel comfortable with that. That's an amount of money that is less than most of the streaming services that entertain me. This takes time to secure me. So to me, it's worth it. That's how I
It
feel
is.
about
Yeah.
that from
That's
a
a good
pricing
point.
standpoint.
Yeah, I really do agree with that. And Bitwarden is basically what I wished LastPass was, in my opinion, with the interface being better. But there's a browser plugin, and I remember LastPass slowing down my browsers quite a bit. And this one doesn't seem to do that. Now, to be fair, I don't know if LastPass even still has that problem. They could have, for all I know, completely fixed that. But going back to your point about open source, though, um, I think the Vivaldi web browser is a very good example of this because it's actually one of my favorite web browsers, and I would probably consider switching to it full time because it has like some amazing features and they've done such a great job with it. But it's not fully open source. But when they're pressured on this, not being fully open source, they'll come back with, well, the browsing engine is fully open source. I'm like, well, that's fine. But your UI is not, and you've added some things, and there could be a vulnerability chain unless you're keeping up on that. And if you're not, well, how do I know I could use a browser? Which is why I recommend that no one use Vivaldi. But at the same time, I hate saying that because it's such an amazing browser. But here you go, the same thing. You have an open source project that's been forked and turned into Vivaldi with their own secret sauce, and sometimes that secret sauce is what does you in at the end of the day.
Yeah. Someone pointed out, and I think I remember reading this before, so I've never used Fault Warden. It's not a fork, it's a new implementation written in Rust. So I
Oh,
don't know. Now I have not really more questions, but they made a back end that's compatible with the Vault Warden front end. So that becomes interesting. And one thing
yeah.
I'll make note of, um, when it comes to browser plugins, one of the rules for writing browser plugins is the code can't be obfuscated. So whether it's LastPass, OnePass, or whatever other password manager, the browser plugins are actually going to never be fully closed source. If anyone's ever wondering about that, that's actually I didn't realize that's actually a requirement. Is you can't do code obfuscation. That's how they monitor what plugins go on browsers.
Hmm.
This is true for both Mozilla and for Chrome extensions. The code can't be you can't just have binary blobs, which I think is actually really smart because that's how you know if something changed. This is what allows the browser places to understand what's happening. And it doesn't mean there isn't a bad browser plugin that doesn't come in and do something bad. But they're able to reverse engineer it and figure out what bad thing it was doing.
Absolutely, and someone in our chat mentioned that, they wouldn't trust any third party to host their passwords, and I can understand that mindset completely.
Yeah.
I don't really think it's a bad mindset, but at the same time, if it's encrypted before it leaves, there's never reason assuming that the encryption is good, right? If it's a weak, expired, or outdated, deprecated encryption, then that's, equally terrible. But assuming it's a really good and strong cipher, then I honestly feel like there's no reason, and correct me if I'm wrong, to, doubt a third party. They're just receiving like gobbledygook, basically encrypted text. They don't know what it is and they can't know what it is. They can't reverse engineer it. So if as long as it's being encrypted properly, I can't really see a reason why that would be a problem.
Yeah. And the way the password managers work, all the well-written ones, this is going to be LastPass, Bitwarden, and a number of other ones that are out there. They never know. And I have a video called what is sent to your password manager, or what your password manager knows about you. I can't remember exactly what I titled it. Easy to find. If you type in password manager, I go through step by step in showing how the encrypted blob is handed over. And then from there, your master password that decrypts it, all that's happening browser side. It's not actually sending your master password back over the wire out to the
Yep.
system to bring it back. That's a very important distinction for how all proper password. I can't say all password managers because I'm sure someone wrote a dumb one out there that doesn't do that. But the popular ones that I'm aware of, I know specifically LastPass and Bitwarden definitely do that.
Hmm.
And I'm sure there are others, which is an important distinction. Now, I think some people have the concern like, hey, now they're handling my passwords and I feel like I'm not in control of it, not from a security standpoint, but what if something happens? Bitwarden, I don't know, they decide they don't want to do this no more, or any password company.
Or they have like a major outage in
Yeah.
someone's network somewhere, then you can't
Can you
get
get
to
to
your
your
person.
passwords when there's an outage? And this is true for more than just Bitwarden, but I'll mention Bitwarden because we're on that topic and me and Jay both use it. The desktop app and the browser plugin both cache each time they're synchronized. So if the server is offline, it will still have the passwords available to you at their last sync. The only thing you can't do is add new ones because it'll give you an error because it can't synchronize that new information somewhere, so it does not have any offline synchronization capabilities like I'll write this password now and sync it later. But what it can do is read all of them or give you last known passwords. You also have the ability to import and export Vault. So if you want to move between password managers, Bitwarden has both import and export options. So you can also just do your own backups once in a while. And it does offer encryption of those backups. So you can back up your Bitwarden, you can encrypt it and keep that somewhere so you have your own copy. I do self-host it. There are some prerequisites though. Now, I like self-hosting it. Self-hosting is great. It's just a cool thing, except not everyone is capable of self-hosting or doing these prerequisites. Which is going to be have a working mail system, so you have to be able to send emails from it. It relies on that for certain aspects of it. You also have to have an SSL cert. Now, it does have the ability to, I believe it's got Let's Encrypt built in. I'm using a proxy in front of it, which works perfectly fine. Specifically, I'm using HA proxy.
Mhm.
I like self-hosting it because it's one extra layer, but it also creates some complexities that I've considered moving it back to their system, because one of the complexities is the fact that if you want to use Bitwarden Send and you don't have it publicly accessible, you're not able to use some of the cool features they've added to it. And I trust them pretty well to where I feel like it's not a big deal. So I may at some point move it back to the cloud because then I get some integrations that I don't have. But overall, even if you don't self host it, it's still a very solid and secure system.
I think my only complaint, I know this is a very petty complaint, and it's probably not even Bitwarden's fault. I bet you this is the browser's fault in this case, but if I'm editing in the browser, you just click on the Bitwarden icon. I don't know, you want to change your password in there or something or edit some fields. If you ever click off of it, you will lose all your changes
Oh,
every
yes.
single time. And I wish that when you clicked on that icon, the window would stay open because if I change focus to another window, for example,
Yes.
as soon as I change focus, it goes away. And I feel like that's the most annoying, egregious thing. And it doesn't sound that bad, but when you
It is though. I
it
agree
is
with you
though, yeah,
completely.
it is because when you start editing, especially when you're going in the notes and you, have, like, TOTP codes or whatever it is you wanna securely save there, and you have a number of these, especially if you have a browser window open and you're using the desktop or not the desktop app, but you have another browser window open, and that one gives you some information, so you wanna copy that information and then paste it in there, it's just gonna go away as soon as you change the window. But that's not really that I mean, you could work around that. The other thing I have a love-hate relationship with this. I love the fact that it has time-based one-time passwords built right into Bitwarden, so you could literally, log into a website, and ask for your, time-based code, and then paste because Bitwarden can handle that for you. But I'm not really sure that I want Bitwarden to be handling everything because, if someone did get a hold of my passphrase, they would also have my time-based one-time
Right.
password codes as well. And I don't think I really like that, but I can see that it is very convenient to just be able to autofill a password, paste, hit enter, and then you're in. So I suppose with your, less important websites, maybe, I don't know, a forum account or something, it might be acceptable. But I'm not really sure I would go as far as to put your banking one-time password in there or anything like that. It's not that Bitwarden is doing it wrong. It's just that if your password leaks, then they have the keys to everything, and having some of that segregated might actually be better.
So one of the things I do in to avoid the little closing window problem is one, you can pop Bitwarden out into its own little window. So that's how
Mhm.
I solve the notes problem.
Hmm.
'Cause I do it all the time because I constantly am using those notes. So yeah, if you click on it, there's an option to it's the little top left. It says pop out a
How
new
did
window.
I not notice that
Yeah.
all of this time? It is right there. The solution, I was complaining up a storm, and the, solution was probably 1/20th of the time it took me to complain.
Oh, well, no, trust me, I've definitely done it because I'll start typing something and realize I wanna copy a piece of data, and I now have lost the other piece I typed, so trust me, there's a reason. I took me a long time before I found it, but the second part, I really like that you can keep the TOTP in there. Which TOTP do I keep in there, though? Because I do keep some, and I'll admit to that, but
Mhm.
it's exactly what you said. I have all these different forums I belong to, and with the exception of my forums, I'm not the main forum administrator. My forums, I do not keep my TOTP in there. But for all the other forums I'm signed up for, which are, everything from PF Sense forums and everything else, I always save my TOTP in there because one, it's low risk. If someone wanted to impersonate me in forums, I don't know why they would do that. They could make me look bad or whatever, but it seems unlikely that here's the thing. If my Bitwarden were compromised, do you know my top concern would not be, oh no, will someone impersonate me in the PF Sense forums? We'll throw it out there. That is a concern, but it is on the very bottom of all concerns if someone got into my Bitword. So,
Yeah,
um,
the only
and
exception is in my mind is why this might even be important for some is if there's metadata even in a forum account like your address or something, it is possible for someone to use that to do a forgot password or an account authentication thing or call customer service. Please verify your address. But then again, I mean, you just have to be careful and mindful what fields you fill out and which accounts. I mean, if obviously if it has payment information in there, no. But just think about the information. I don't think very many forums that I remember will ask for address, so that's probably not a non-issue, like you mentioned. But just throwing
Mhm.
that out there to make people aware of it.
Yeah. So it's I in the other problem if I were to use my TOTP app to store all of those, man, I have enough in there now. So imagining for every forum having another, I have to go to my phone for the app. This is actually one of the reasons I don't use Bitwarden on my phone because it seems like somewhat of a violation, so to speak, in my head of trust boundaries. Because if I
Mhm.
have Bitwarden on my phone, now my phone, which has rolling 2FA codes on it, also has my passwords on it, and they're in one place on one device, and that bothers me a little. So I've always kept those kind of separate on there. Now, just and this is not something that's available if you're an iPhone user, but I'll throw this out there if you're an Android user or you use the F-Droid. Aegis, AEGIS Authenticator is a free, secure, and open source app to manage your 2FA codes. I really like Aegis. It's because it's open source, because it's open how they do things. I think it's a really cool app for managing your 2FA. There's always going to be someone out there that was, I like Authy, and I don't think there's any problem with Authy. I just don't use it. But I know
Yeah.
Authy is good for if you synchronizing between accounts and things like that. I worry about something that can synchronize between accounts. It's just you can call me a little of a tinfoil hat on that topic, but Aegis does
Yeah.
not have that option. Aegis does have backup and export options. Aegis has a feature I really like though. If I save a 2FA, I can actually get the 2FA back out of it. I can actually get the code from the 2FA back out if I need to.
Right, that's a good feature to have as well. Yeah, Authy has a few quirks of its own, but it's not, I mean, it's
Yeah.
fine.
Well, one of
And
the things with Aegis is I can reproduce the QR code. I hit make QR code, and you can point my phone. If we wanted to, I have to do this. I wish I didn't. There's certain accounts that don't have multiple users for a business that we
right.
use. So me and my staff want to have the same 2FA code because we're using a common username and password. And instead of sticking it in Bitwarden and sharing it, we actually will share it through Aegis by pointing our phones at each other.
Well, I mean, you have to navigate these things, right? Because I,
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the biggest issues when it comes to security is that obviously not every app or company is going to make the right decisions. I mean, it could be like a company has like the best security that we know of in their app, and they're doing all the right things, and but they also allow SMS 2FA or worse, only support 2FA via SMS, which just really annoys me. Or also when you have a I forgot my authenticator button that lets you just, oh, you don't have it, that's fine. We'll just verify your account and we'll let you in anyway. So I feel like some companies kind of do all this wrong, but that's a whole other episode altogether. I feel like as long as we keep in mind what each app's capabilities are, we navigate around those as securely as we can, then I think we've done our best.
Right. And one other feature that's kind of neat for Bitwarden, I'll throw it out there. This goes outside the home lab, but for worth noting, as someone who's a reseller of Bitwarden, when you have to manage your clients' passwords, one of the things it does is as we sign clients up, it creates a shared vault between me and the client. So that's how we're moving towards client password management too. It's actually a really cool
Mm.
feature in Bitwarden. I sign up client, I have a shared vault. I can put the passwords there and then assign them to the users, and they belong to the vault, not to the user. That way, if a user changes or moves, that shared feature is actually pretty cool in Bitwarden for helping. You're actually upping the level of security for your clients, and if your client changes passwords, you get to see that you can have access to that common shared vault. Between them to help manage those. And as an IT service provider, I imagine at least a few of the people here work in the same industry as me. So
Yeah,
that's kind of,
absolutely.
I'll just throw that feature out there as being pretty cool. I may do a completely separate video on my channel about it because we just have been fascinated by like how slick it works. So
Yeah, I feel like that'll solve a, I know it's not a home lab issue like you said, but in enterprise, I feel like one of my bigger pet peeves is when we get a contract for supporting a company, then they just
right.
send us their admin passwords, clear text. The worst one is when they send their certificate files for their SSL cert unencrypted in the clear, and then I have to be the one to tell them that they need to deploy a new certificate company wide because they just invalidated it.
Yeah.
And because it's a real problem. People don't understand if they're not us, like in our industry, they don't understand the security is kind of lacking there. So it's just one of those things we deal with, but as long as we have a means. And home lab, I mean, there could be something. I mean, if you're on vacation and someone wants to help you fix something, because I don't know how many people have friends that help them with home lab, because that is a thing. It might just be a way to say, hey, could you log into this thing and update my packages for me? And if you trust that person, obviously, I wouldn't give them credentials to your bank account or anything. But if it's just running updates, and I mean that could be okay if you trust them. Again, if you trust them, I'm going to keep saying that. But I don't. Yeah, I think you're right. It's not going to be as useful for home lab, but I'm sure there's going to be several out there that are already thinking of a use case for that.
Yeah. Um, One of the things too, of note here, we mentioned the two of them we like, but there's plenty of other good ones out there, but I don't have the time to check them all because I'd seen someone mention, I think it's called like Password Bolt, BOLT.
Hmm.
They're another one that's, I believe, open source. I think I may be saying the name right, but I simply, because I get a lot of requests, Tom, can you tell me about this one? I don't have time to test them all. I've tested Bitwarden and used it for like 3 years now. So, and Jay uses it, and it's because we know the product very well. It doesn't mean the other products are bad just because me and Jay don't like them. It just means there's only so many hours in a day and only so many projects I can take on. And testing every new password manager that's open source is low on my list of things I have time to do. Because like
Right.
Bitwarden's been there a while doing it. I don't see anything wrong with the way they do it. There's not any killer feature I've seen in the other ones that make me go, oh man, if Bitwarden had this, I'd stay with them. I'm going to jump ship and go over here. They basically seem to have feature parity to some extent with Bitwarden, but if making the same product again doesn't make me change to it, you have to make the same
Right.
product and then give me that extra reason to switch. So I'll just figure I'll answer those questions for the why not my favorite password manager questions that come up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about OpenSense. I'm sure it's totally amazing and just awesome, but mine works. And
Yeah.
translating all those rules, I mean, that's a whole weekend, and I have other things to do during the weekend. So nothing against the ones we don't cover. It's just that thing about
Yep.
being human and needing sleep always kind of gets in the way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just it takes a lot because when I say I've tested something, I mean I've put the time in. We have 9 employees, so I have 9 people using Bitwarden. Then we have clients we've resold this to that are many more than 9 people using it. So we've used this thing a lot, so we have a good familiarity with it. So I can tell you, what we like, what we don't like, type things like the little pop out window problem. But
Yeah.
I haven't run into any gotchas or you shouldn't use it that would make me even want to look at them. So that's my thoughts on there. As I see people asking about other ones, I just haven't had time to test them. I'm sure there's a lot of great ones out there, and they may be like you may like the UI better. And if there's no security issues with it, go ahead and use it. Now let's talk
Yeah.
about security. Or do you have anything more to add about Bitwarden?
I don't think so.
All right. So this is a topic because I seen someone ask about the LastPass hack. I think LastPass did a good job of being transparent. I also think the part of the problem is eh, they were transparent to a fault.
Hmm.
Having someone get in your systems, but then able to do something that was a user-facing event, falls on the edge of whether or not you should well, I mean, I say you should report it, but that level of transparency created confusion. I did a video on this topic. It did not mean that the place was compromised, but of course it was easy, and when I did that video, talking about the last fresh breach, I used my wife as an example who doesn't work in tech, and, yeah, it just gives you that idea that, oh, you know, uh, it's hard to communicate to the general public about this. And then even the technical community seemed to get a lot of it wrong, thinking there was a bigger hack than there was with LastPass. That being said, LastPass has not had any major things that make me think that they're an insecure company. They seem to be transparent almost to a fault. But then again, that's where we're trying to go with security. It shouldn't be an anomaly that companies are that level of transparent. Then the question is, though, once you centralize all your passwords, where's that security risk? And there is some risk that comes with having your passwords centralized, but there's a lot of benefits. First thing, having them in a browser, there's a good and bad. The good thing about having them in the browser is because that's mostly what you're logging into. Two, it will help dramatically with your sites and validating them because if you try to get to a phishing site and you have to manually type in your credentials because your password manager has decided not to fill them in, there's a really big positive on the side of security because anytime I don't have an autofill, I have questions. Why isn't it autofilling? Did the URL change? Did they change how they log in? And this actually happened. My bank changed their back end. I knew they were doing updates, but when they changed their back end for the logins, my login quit working because it checked the full URL and it would only log into the full URL. So when they moved it, it gave me pause and it made me actually reach out because it was my business banking. So I reached out to my business banker and said, "Did you guys make changes to your back end?" And they said, "Yes, we did." I said, "Okay, is this the changes you made? This is the new URL login." They said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Okay, cool." It gave me a reason to investigate and ask questions. So I like that about having all the passwords in the browser. It just an extra level of awareness to make me ask more questions when it doesn't fill in. The downside is, and this is the video I mentioned at the very beginning, Someone pointed out there is a new, and I believe this Trusted Security did this. There's a new um, C2 system for Cobalt Strike that has Cobalt Strike is a red team tool, quasi red team tool. It's also used by lots of threat actors. Once they compromise your system, what's next? What do you do when you get control of someone's system? Well, you would like to run some applications to pull things out of memory. What is the thing you're going to target? Well, let's target the browser. Now, browsers do a lot of obfuscation to make it a little bit harder to pull things out, but I have a video I recently did about storing passwords, and someone says passwords in memory should be encrypted. And that person didn't understand how things work because there comes a point where everything has to be in memory to operate in kind of a, even though it's compartmentalized, at some point things are in memory. Um, and if you know, and this is what the goal of this extra tooling was to get into the system, target LastPass, look for them with the ability to extract some of the things that are extracted in memory from their LastPass, which is going to be some of the passwords that are in there. So when you open the vault and it's decrypting the vault, well, now you've got that piece of information. My counter argument to a lot of this when people freak out is you could just have easily have a keylogger on there. Once you have a system level control of someone's system, you can
Yeah.
keylog and get their master password because they showed some of the challenges of what it was taking, which was only about 40 seconds on that computer. They didn't really see how fast the computer was, but each hunt through the memory had a time delay pause of figuring out where those passwords were in memory. It's not like they're just mapped right here. Here's LastPass, and LastPass is a clear pointer for this. Also, the way browsers, especially with all the reframing of memory, they're always kind of keep things very compartmentalized to make it a little bit harder for different things to find things randomly in memory. So it's kind of a cat and mouse game on there. But that being said, it's still, in my opinion, better, even though you're centralizing them, it's better to have them in there. The other
Right.
thing of having them in the browser is you're chasing through a lot of sub processes of the browser versus if you do use a desktop application. And this was the video I did recently talking about Microsoft and using Electron for their Teams app that gave a place for people to steal the tokens because they weren't doing any encryption with the Electron app. But technically, if you have access to the machine, if you steal someone's browser token and session cookies, which they're making them harder to steal, but once you get those out, you also have the same level of things. It comes down to you have to really monitor who's on your system because once they're on your system at a high permission level, whether it is a keylogger they have, a tool that can extract things from memory or watch them, you have a lot of scary things that could be happening on there. That these are where the fundamental problems are. And by the way, I mean they do happen, but you really got to focus on endpoint security and really be thinking heavily about that, not just the browser password, because at some point, whether it's a desktop app, whether you're like, oh, Cobalt Strike's looking for LastPass, I should use another password manager. I'm like, no, no, no. They just haven't wrote another one for the less common password managers. They've wrote some tooling to make it easier to extract LastPass because it's hands down one of the most popular ones out there. But the problem still persists across all of these. So that's the way you want to think about security: is keep people off your endpoints.
Yeah. I mean, that basically is what it comes down to. I mean, sometimes, when things happen, it's a legitimate problem and, shame on the company for doing that. But I also kind of feel like there's some, like you were saying, some misunderstandings about how these things work. I mean, what's next? We have someone saying, "Hey, someone broke into my password database." Dude, your password is ABC123. I don't
Yeah.
care. They got into my password database. At what point does someone start saying that? I mean, we have to have a reasonable level of understanding of what's required here. We need a strong password. We need to check the boxes, and like I said, keep people off our system because if we're letting everybody in, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. Yeah, when someone gets any system level privileges, that's when everything goes haywire, and that's always the goal of threat actors. How high of a, privilege level can I get on a system? And
Right.
having triggers, for knowing that on there. Matter of fact, I wanna explore this a little more, not too off topics, we're still on the scary topic of what do threat actors do when they're first on your system? And this is where Thinks Canary, Hernan Mir, and I've interviewed him before on my channel. He's a pretty neat, pretty fun person, but they do these free canary tokens. Yeah, I've done a video on free. If you type in free canary tokens, I break down all the canary tokens that were available at the time of the video, but they've added another token. One of those tokens is when people run common commands, and threat actors do this all the time, such as "Who am I?" Because the first thing you do, I got to a system, mystery system. They clicked the link. I'm in, but where am I in at? So the first thing you type is "Who am I?" But Jay, how often do you ever run "Who am I?" You always know who you are, right?
Yeah, I try to know who I am, but I do run it from time to time. I'm not really sure why, but I catch myself doing that
Yeah.
sometimes.
One of the things you can do, and this was one of the clever ones, is you can create a trigger. This was specifically for Windows, not Linux. There's probably a different way to do it in Linux, but a clever ways to do it was to create a special trigger for anytime "Who am I?" is run to send a notification to you. Because unless you're the one running it,
Mm.
that's a question, and that's the first thing a lot of threat actors do. So there's all these little things you can do to help level up your endpoint security, and even if it's triggering. I mean, they're in, so have your panic attack when that runs and you didn't run it, but at least now you're aware of it, because they usually, even running these different tools against your system take time. They don't necessarily happen always automated or instant, and threat actors frequently sit for a little while to see what kind of intelligence they can gather. So that's one of those little tips I want to throw out there, kind of related to security and thinking about your endpoints. It's one of the things I want to play with on there. Leave your comments down below if you have a few other suggestions kind of around that, because these are some fun little topics on there. Locking out or knowing what commands are run, or even, and I've known some in a long time in the Linux world, people have done this, swapped out commands they don't use for something else, so it triggers instead. I think
Yeah, there's always some
there's
fun
always
shenanigans
something.
when it comes to security.
Yeah, always something fun like that. But hopefully, this is an enlightening topic for everyone. Hopefully, you have a little bit better understanding, and a couple products you may want to look at. Like I said, no resellers, by the way. We're just liking Bitwarden. This is not sponsored or brought to you by Bitwarden. We're just two happy Bitwarden users. So
Yeah.
that's
Been like several years, we probably should reach out to them. We've been using them forever, but I've never had a conversation with them, so sure they're nice though.
Yep. So don't reuse your passwords. Use a password manager. Use your password. Master password should be, or master passphrase. We'll get that out there because someone will complain. Tom, don't say master password. Say master passphrase. So it's even longer. It's a collection of words and done in an obscure way. Yes. Whatever methodology, hopefully you can remember, because that's an important one. Yes, I do have my own complexities and ways I do it that I will not reveal, because I do it my way.
I think we all